Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
There are three ingredients to hope. The first is the cornerstone. It's the goal. Hey, what are you looking forward to for a better future? And the second ingredient is willpower. This is what we talked about last week. And the third ingredient is called a pathway. This is your plan to actually accomplish a better future. Today, what I want to do is I want to talk about pathways. How can we be prudent with our pathway? Now, prudent means to give care or thought to your future. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going on their pathway and they suffer for it. When you decide to step into the shoes of prudence and be curious and swallow the pride, oftentimes what you find is hope. The simple keep going, and what happens? They suffer for it. And as a result, there's less hope in your tomorrow, in your next week, in your next month, and you're stuck. You see, guys, I think one of the greatest Christmas gifts you could give yourself this Christmas is to be prudent.
Well, I was going to ask Buck if he's been following the World Cup at all. Is that a no?
I thought about it. The only reason you and I have been following it at all is because Shane's been following it.
That's
We've
true.
been with Shane for a week.
Yeah, Shane was watching games on a plane, and he's watching games in the car.
Why?
Well,
Why
from
do
his
Canadians follow soccer?
I know.
Well, you know what's funny is Canada scored their first goal ever in the World Cup this year, so maybe he's super stoked. I mean, they ended up losing and they were like knocked out in the first round, but I think he was pretty stoked about that.
Well, Shane had that whole pilgrim season of his life where he was in Europe and backpacking and going to Bible school and all sorts of stuff. So maybe he got into soccer then, perhaps. I don't know. Buck, I do want to ask, because you talked about presents a little bit on Sunday. And I love the part, like the boys opening presents and Jill's like, you shouldn't have. And you're like, no, you should have. Like, that's so true. Have you done all your Christmas shopping? Like, you have a plan?
Kind of. So so for the boys, Jill and I have a spreadsheet, and we've worked the spreadsheet pretty hard. So, I think we're good. I think we're good for our parents. But I'm struggling with Jill. I am struggling. I bought her, and I'll say this here before Christmas, but I bought her a shoe storage thing.
Does she listen to this podcast? You know this is going to go out before.
Okay. Yeah. But if she does, I'm okay with her hearing that, because she was like, hey, I want this thing to store shoes. And and I was like, oh, okay. And
so it's not like some creative idea you had. Like, she actually wanted it.
And it was delivered yesterday, and she brought it in. And it says on the box something like shoe rack or something like that. Nice. So that was, I don't think that's pretty safe with that. But then I've got two things I'm thinking about, and I don't know. And one of them I've gotten her several times, and it's like I'm in this weird dilemma because I think she expects it. And she's kind of like, that's the one that if she's, oh, you shouldn't have, but thank you, because I think that's, but the other one is an unexpected, but I think she would have the same reaction, but then go, well, what about that other one?
Yep.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
How about you?
No, have not. Actually, the thing does watch this podcast pretty regularly. But I know what she wants for Christmas.
Yeah.
I'm unsure of getting it and fitting it in all the other things we're buying for our family members and all that stuff. So yeah, that's gonna be interesting. I did just give her an ad hoc gift.
Oh yeah.
She went on a girls' weekend with some of her friends and came back, and so I just had Grayson over the weekend, and we went to Hobby Lobby and we did a little arts and crafts project.
Okay.
And so I basically made flowers of his like hands and feet, like dipped in paint.
Oh.
So it's like his hands and feet are different colors, and they're the flower, and then
That feels
green
very
stem.
creative.
Yeah, and then I gave it to her, and she was like almost in tears, and I was like, man, I should have saved this for like
Christmas. That would have been the
or
one.
a birthday or Mother's Day.
Yeah.
But
Oh.
no, I was. It was
There's
great.
that spontaneity.
Yeah,
Keeps the
spontaneity is
relationship
good.
fresh.
Yep. But I think I know what I'm gonna get her.
Okay.
And she already. That's the hard part about when we're doing presents on a budget, and here's how much we have. I'm like, well, is there? Sometimes I feel this expectation. Well, I should go over the budget because I want to go like all out for her. But then at the same time, if I'm talking to her, I'm like, hey, can you please stay on the budget for our gifts? And so it's I just find myself in that dichotomy.
I know. Yeah, I don't know. And yes. And with my boys, I'm feeling that same tension because we've already bought them gifts, and then they're telling us some things they want, and they're like, "Well, I really hope." And we still say Santa Claus, like, well, they don't believe that, but
Yeah.
Oh,
What?
I don't know. Was there? That'd be an interesting podcast to talk about Santa Claus and how to talk to your kids about Santa Claus and what you say. That's an interesting one. Anyways, so I'm not sure. Now I feel that like insecurity as a father to go, are the gifts that I've given my sons, are they going to open it and go like, thanks, Dad?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Or Dad, like, did you not listen to me? I've had that last year. I had that a couple times.
Yeah.
And Jonathan actually said, can you take this back?
That's awesome.
Like, yes, we can.
Yeah.
That was always the funny thing for me growing up. My parents would ask us for lists, Like every year we would make these. It was like a whole thing on Thanksgiving. We'd all write our lists and give them to our parents. My parents would not buy a single thing that we would write on the lists.
Oh, wow.
It was just like, they wanted to buy stuff that was like meaningful and thoughtful, which like now that I'm older, I get. But every year we were like, why do we write lists? You guys never
don't get it.
never like get anything. It was kind of funny.
Yeah. Don't know. Yeah. So, on December 25th, it's all going to be realized, and we'll just, all the things we're thinking right now, we'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah. Well, it's nice for us. We bought gifts for Grayson, and like he's not even going to know what's happening as we give him gifts. So we'll enjoy that piece while we still have it until he's like, really, can I take this back, Dad?
Yes.
So that day will come. Mm-hmm. Anyways, so we're in our Christmas series. We are in part 2 of Hope. Mm-hmm. And part 1, you talked a lot about you went history lesson on hope and how kind of the story of the Bible and hope and how it kind of weaves into Jesus coming and being the light of the world, and left it a little open-ended in terms of that's why we can hope, but how do we practically experience hope? And part 2 and then part 3 coming as well, we're talking a little bit more about how we practically experience it. And you took a little bit of a different spin on it and going into Proverbs and pulling a proverb in. And I love the connection that you did between the word refuge, because I've heard this proverb. We've taught about this proverb before at Northpoint. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. But I've never thought of that word refuge as hope, as a place of hope. And so that was a really cool distinction of like, no. We get hope by making decisions to set ourselves up to get to that place of hope or that goal that we have in our life. And you brought in some of the research and stuff. I'd say, like, quickly, can you recap some of the goal, pathway, willpower components? Because that's a really big foundation for how we practically experience hope.
Sure. Yeah, and I pull all this from Dr. Hillman, and I've talked about him. I talked about him last week on the podcast. But basically, it's the definition of hope. It's like, what is hope? And hope has 3 components. It has goals, pathways, and willpower. And so goals are the cornerstone of hope. That's the easiest part. That's like, hey, I want a better marriage. I want a better relationship.
We hope for.
Yeah, it's what we hope for, better finances, better physically, whatever it is. The thing we hope for, that would be goals. Willpower is the motivation. You have to have some sort of motivation to do something to attain your future hope. And so what's your motivation? And that was really part 1, is like the ultimate motivation is Jesus Christ. And that gives us, daily to get up, daily to look at ourselves with purpose and meaning, daily to work as if working for the Lord, because we know that God will keep his promises, that God's working. And so that's the motivation piece and willpower. And then what I talked about in part 2 is pathways. And pathways are like the activities, the roadway, the things that we do to attain our future hope. Because it's one thing to go like, hey, one day I hope to be married. One day I hope to have this house. One day I hope to be physically fit. But then the question is always, what's your plan? What are you going to do? And that's the pathway. Like, what are you going to do? Because we all intuitively know that just, having a lot of emotion and motivation and having a really clear future hope and dream is great. That's part of it. But you have to have some sort of a plan. It's like, hey, I want to be super healthy. Great. So I'm going to eat a bunch of Oreos and, hey, I want to have a great marriage. So I'm never going to spend time with my wife. It's like, oh no, that's not a good plan. So we would say not a good plan. Or we would say you probably should adjust your plan, or here's 3 or 4 things to think about. That's all pathway language. Or, what is your pathway? What is your plan? So, and I love how Dr. Hellman unpacks this. I would highly encourage people to go and listen to his TED Talk, and he just unpacks the 3 components and just just gives a little bit more context to them. But you need them all 3 to make hope happen.
Yeah, and it's very true. I mean, you kind of connected Dr. Hellman, his research to that really famous, I don't know if famous, but memorable quote from Andy Stanley, where he says, your direction, not your intention, determines your destination. And it's so true when it comes to hope too, because it's your pathway, not your willpower, that determines whether or not you get to your goal, or you achieve what you hope for, or you experience what you hope for. Meaning it's the direction, the path that you're on, not necessarily the intention you have or the willpower or the motivation you have. That's ultimately going to determine where you're going to end up.
100%.
Now we're getting into the nuances of hope and how we experience it and motivation and where we go. But this all ties back to the story of Christmas. So Jesus being the light of the world and the story of Christmas, what does that practically mean for our pathway, for our direction, all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think one of the questions you have to ask in life is like, okay, what does allow us to have a better marriage? What does allow you to have peace? What does allow, what is the pathway to meaning and purpose? What is the pathway to, being the greatest father or the greatest mother you can be? What is the pathway to whatever it is you're longing for? Being financially free. What does that even mean? So everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got, ideas, your friends, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, all the priest, the reverend, I do, all this kind of stuff. I just think the ultimate equalizer, the one who came into the world and said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, is Jesus. And Jesus says, I'm the author of life. So when he says things like this, he's saying, I am your ultimate source of your pathway. So whatever you want in life in terms of whatever you're longing for, the question has to be, well, what's your plan? How are you going to get there? How are you going to adjust your pathway? What does that even look like? And that's just coming back full circle to Jesus and going, Jesus came into the world and he said, I've come to give you life and life to the full. So clearly if the outcome, that's a very hopeful statement, a really hopeful life, a really meaningful life, a really full, that lasting contentment, joy, and fulfillment. Okay, so what's the path? Well, Jesus, all through his teachings, all through his life, continues to give you, light up the path. You want to have a full life? Here's what it looks like. You want to have a full life? Here's what it looks like. You want to, this kind of thing. So that's where Jesus comes in. And I think when it comes to Jesus, I think there's really 2 parts. There's the first part of who in the world is this guy? Did he really exist in history? Is he really the Son of God? The ultimate question I think in life, and we've talked about this on Sunday, is Jesus really the one who he claimed to be? Is the Son of the living God? And if he is, it's a game changer. It changes everything about your pathway. It changes everything about life. It changes everything about your hope. And if he isn't, then why bother?
Yeah. And I love that question too, because we oftentimes think of that as an open-ended, fill in the blank question, but really it's a multiple choice question. Yeah. Because Jesus only gives us a couple options, and this is C.S. Lewis's argument about liar, lunatic, or Lord, and that's a whole argument for the person of Jesus and who he was. But I just say if someone has not asked that question honestly before, to think of it, it's multiple choice because of the radical nature of the things Jesus said and did. Right. And that's a big component of choosing to follow Jesus.
Yeah, it's a question that needs a little bit of investigation too, because you need to investigate what he said. Because if you just have, from my childhood church experience, so you're bringing that Jesus, you're like the child Jesus into the equation, well, that's easy to walk away from. That's easy to dismiss. But C.S. Lewis was a guy who wasn't a follower. He was an atheist, but he began
for 5 decades.
Yes. Yeah. And he began to read the teachings of Jesus. Very similar to, and I'm not like advocating, but Jordan Peterson right now, he's in this like C.S. Lewis moment, where Jordan Peterson would once say, I was atheist agnostic, is now going, man, when I look at the claims of Christ, when I look at the words of Christ, when I look at the teachings of Christ, and I look at life, and I look at, it can be tested. That's the thing about Christianity that's so cool. You can test it. Does this actually work in life? And so that's what C.S. Lewis did, began to read the teachings of Jesus, the words of Jesus, what he claimed. He is the Logos, meaning the explanation for everything in life. Okay, if he is, let's test what he actually explained, in life. And does it correlate to psychology? Does it correlate to experience? Does it correlate to everyday life? So I think it requires investigation on that end to go like, who is Jesus? And, is he the Son of the living God? So read what he said and then begin to answer that question or begin to think about that question. But then I think the investigation also goes in terms of a much more practical way to go like, well, are there objective, verifiable things in history? Are there objective, verifiable things in psychology that we can point back to and say like, yes, there are concrete reasons why I put my trust and confidence in Jesus? And I think some of those great resources, we've talked about those before, but I would highly recommend answering the question like, do you believe, do you trust, do you put your confidence in, like, Case for Christ or Case for Faith. I think those by Lee Strobel are great resources. A friend of mine I was talking to this morning, he said his grandmother's 5 years old. And she is not a Christian. She's not a follower of Christ. But he has told her for like 10 years, hey, would you ever be open to reading this book, Case for Christ? And she's like, no. Well, just in the last month, she picked it up and she said, can we have lunch? Because I started reading this and this is fascinating. I had no idea there's this much evidence, like objective, historical, like you can go to places around the world, visit, you can read books. There's documented things in history to go, Jesus was real. So Case for Christ, great resource. I think Tim Keller has a book, The Reason for God. That's another great resource in terms of more from a philosophical perspective to go, is there reason as to put your confidence in him from a logic and philosophy perspective? And then I think, John Lennox is Dr. Lennox is at Oxford, or I think he's retired now. But no, I think he's still there. But he's got go on YouTube, search for John Lennox. He's debated Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion. There's so many different resources out there. And so John Lennox has written lots of books about science. So if you love science, John Lennox is a scientist, and he talks about how science and God, how they're not like anti, they actually are very complementary. And then William Lane Craig is a philosopher. He's another guy that I would highly recommend his books. He talks about like Genesis and Adam and being the first man. And so if you have questions about Genesis and Adam and the first man, and that keeps you away from putting your faith and trust in Christ. And that seems to be the obstacle. He's got a great book there. He's a philosopher, so he debates. He's got lots of debates online. And he's got a podcast. I would highly recommend listening to him. I just think that's the first part is believing who is Jesus. And then I think the second part of that is following. And that's Jesus was really clear on it's like I said on Sunday, it's one coin, the Jesus coin. One side is believe. I think you have to do that investigative belief, not child belief, but investigative belief. And then the other side is, are you going to follow him? Because he calls you equally to believe and equally to follow.
Yeah. So in terms of, what does Jesus, the story of Christmas, mean practically for our pathway? Well, he lays out a pathway.
Yeah.
And it's a pathway that starts by believing, and there's a lot of reasons why you can believe, and then it continues by choosing to follow him.
Right.
And
Christmas is the light. I mean, so Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. I've come to light up your pathway. And if you follow me, he says, then I'm going to light up your life. Then you will have life and life to the full. These are statements like we make on Sunday sometimes. Jesus makes your life better and makes you better at life. Well, that's what we hope for. I want my life to be better, right? Future better, yes. I want my relationship to be better. Well, how? Well, that's Christmas. Christmas lights up that pathway. It gives you the steps. It gives you the direction. It gives you what that looks like. But it comes at a significant cost, and that is following. So Jesus was very clear about what that looks like, what it looks like to follow him in your marriage, what it looks like to follow him as a parent, what it looks like to follow him in your morality. But then the question is, are you going to choose to do that? And that's where, the rubber hits the road in terms of, well, I'm not experiencing what Jesus promised. I think the better question is, am I following? And if you are following and not experiencing, he actually even talks about that, but eventually you will. And that's his promise. And that's what I've experienced in life. I shared that on Sunday. Stories of hope I hear. Hey, I was addicted to drugs, or hey, this was happening in my life. I was just had no meaning. I had no hope. Hey, I was full of shame. I looked in the mirror every day of my life and felt like, I don't know why I live. I just feel like I deserve to die. Mm-hmm. And then you hear the opposite. Man, there's like my marriage has hope again. It's not perfect, but there's hope. Hey, I've been able to forgive those on the other side of me. I feel so much freedom and liberation. I'm not as angry as I used to be. Hey, I have so much worth and value when I look at myself in the mirror today. So these stories of hope, you always hear the story of hope. And in my case, it's, and then I met Jesus, and then I trusted Jesus, and then I began to follow Jesus, or then I just surrendered to Jesus, or then that's the narrative. And I think that's the invitation, and that's Christmas. And that's what it's so beautiful, because Christmas means hope is alive. There is a better future for you and for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when it comes to Jesus lighting up our pathway, mm-hmm. How do we practically stay on the pathway of following Jesus? What does that look like? Because that's a long journey. That's a lifelong journey. It is more a destination than it is it's more of a journey than a destination.
Yeah.
And so how do we practically stay on that path?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One would be, I think it's like almost a recentering yourself on a daily basis to go, okay, Jesus, you are the way, the truth, and life. Jesus, you are the perfecter of my life and my faith. Jesus, you did knit me together in my mother's womb. Jesus, you are the one who came to give me life and life to the full. Jesus, you are the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Jesus, you are the Prince of Peace. So I think you got to start with, again, who he is. It's almost like you remind yourself on a daily basis, on a practical level of, okay, therefore, because all of that is true, he has the answers for life. He can light up my pathway. And Jesus, you are the light of the world. So it starts there. And then as a result, that's your motivator to go follow. So in Luke 9, 23 and 24, Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, in other words, if you really want to discover this life and life to the full, and a disciple in the first century, I follow something so closely that the dust from their sandals kicks up on me and gets all over me. It's like, man, I'm full of dust because I'm a disciple of whoever you're following. Jesus says, if you're willing to do that, it's going to look like this. You need to take up your cross daily and follow me. Taking up your cross in the first century is this concept or this idea of death. It's like, hey, it's raining cats and dogs, meaning it's raining like crazy. We say that today. In the first century, taking up your cross is like, ooh, you got to die to everything that maybe you have thought, your previous way of life, your previous pathways, your previous way of thinking. And then Jesus, what I love is he goes and he says, if you're willing to do this and follow me to that degree, and if you lose your life for me, then you find it. The very thing I promised, which is hope, you're going to find. But if you're unwilling to do this, and you're unwilling to surrender every aspect of your life, surrender your life, surrender your morality, surrender your sexuality, surrender your finances, surrender your relationships, surrender every way you used to think about life. If you're unwilling to do this, you will not find life. The very thing you hope for, you may taste, but it'll be fleeting. The very thing you hope for, you may get satiated for a second, but then it'll leave you even more empty. And then you chase and you chase and you chase. That's what he said. And so practically it starts with going, okay, who is Jesus? He's the way, the truth, and the life. He's the author of life. He's the one where my hope will be found. That's the motivator then to go, okay, let me live that life out. And then every arena of life, he talked about, who is my neighbor? Well, okay, I have a neighbor over there and, maybe I don't, they're doing whatever. And he spoke about how to
treat. They're one of those people.
They're one of those people.
Yeah.
So he talked about, practically speaking, how to love your neighbor. He talked about in terms of marriage, like when it comes to lust. So that means what is lust? Begin to explore that. Jesus talked about, part of your sexual intimacy in marriage is going to be so determined by what you do with your eyes. So what are you doing with your eyes? What are you doing with your mind? What are you doing with your heart? Because it's really hard to connect. I would go so far. This is extreme, but to say sexually, your sexual intimacy, you cannot experience what God created you to experience, designed you to experience, if your eyes, your heart, and your mind are wandering. It's always going to be missing. You're going to want more in that area. Well, Jesus spoke into that area. He lit up a pathway in terms of even sexual intimacy. And that's why I talked about on Sunday, I said, I want a better sex life. That was just a seed to plant to go, well, go to Jesus, because he actually talks about, like, what does that look like? Jesus talked about your enemies. Jesus talked about prayer. Jesus talked about don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. I mean, Jesus talked about finances and how we're so caught up and I got to build my kingdom here because I think it's going to satisfy me. And the problem is it satiates for a second, but it's the fleetingness. It's that thing to go, it quenches me for a moment, but then I'm left thirsty again. So I go and go and go. Jesus says, I'm here to quench your thirst. I've got water that will actually satisfy, food that will satisfy. So, practically, I think it starts with belief, reminding yourself of who Jesus is, that's recentering, and then in every arena of life, whatever it is, pick the category, my marriage, pick the category, parenting, pick the category, I don't have peace, pick the category, I don't feel any worth, and my hope is for better worth. We'll then begin to investigate the life of Jesus, the words of Jesus, the attitude of Jesus, what Jesus spoke in, and that's how you begin to light up your pathway. And then the ultimate question you're left with is, am I going to do it?
Yeah.
It's like, Jesus says after he talks all this practical stuff in the Sermon on the Mount, he goes, okay, what are you going to do? I gave you all this instruction, lit up all your pathway. What are you going to do? If you don't do it, it's like building your house on sand. So life's going to come your way, and then you're going to like, this whole thing is all religious. Jesus is nothing. All his promises are fake. He's like, you didn't apply it. You didn't do what I told you to do. Or he's going to say, or the choice is, do it. Follow me. Like, surrender everything to me. And yes, it'll feel like you're dying. There's an element of that. But if you do, that's like a man who builds his house on a rock. And when life comes your way, the ups and downs, the tragedies, the hardships, the good times, the bad times, you're going to remain steady and you're going to remain hopeful, because I am the Prince of Peace. I'm the Prince of Hope. So that's the last part. It's like, are we going to do it or not?
Yeah. I like how you said rock there. I'm the rock.
Well, I think my tongue hit my tooth. It was weird.
Well, I think just to connect all these kind of ideas, it's what we hope for. Mm-hmm. Jesus lights that pathway for us, and it is the question of what are we going to do? Are we going to stay on it? Are we not going to stay on it? And I think in a lot of ways, part of the journey of following Jesus is I heard a guy, Dr. Crawford, Andy Stanley interviewed him, and he was a pastor in Atlanta. And he said, for a lot of people, Jesus is a context of life, but he's not the context for their life. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we take Jesus at like an a la carte level. Like I'll take Jesus into this area of my life and this, but I'm not going to take Jesus into this area of my life. And taking up your cross daily and following Jesus is eventually, in that process, you're going to bump into Jesus enough where you're going to have to surrender that area that you really have hope for something. But the very thing that's going to give you hope is surrendering that area to Jesus and him becoming the context for your life in that area. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard. And that's taking up your cross daily and following him.
Yeah. And as you said earlier, it's the long game. It may start with this area of my life and then this area of my life, but ultimately the invitation of Jesus is everything.
Yep.
I want you to surrender everything. But if you do, you're not going to lose out on anything.
Yep.
You actually gain everything.
Yep. We were, Josh and I, we went skiing with our buddy Shane Norcross.
Oh, yes.
And had a fun time. But they were so I was driving the rental car, and they were making fun of me a lot. Mm-hmm.
Why were they making fun? You not a
well, because I'm a 6 Enneagram, so I'm driving slow around these we're driving up into the mountains and there's no guardrails, there's big drop offs and
he
stuff.
He just gets really nervous about things that I would never really have to
well, I'm 10 and 2 focused. I'm just I'm being a good steward of their lives, essentially, is what I was hoping for.
Okay. That's right.
Yeah,
and you're taking in the scenery because I know you love the scenery.
Well,
it's enjoying the creation of God.
Exactly, and it's wild because if I'm 10 and 2, they're like, "Oh, you're so uptight," and then if I'm like, "Oh, look at that view," they're like, "Look at the road."
Yes.
So what do you guys want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, no, okay.
Haven't quite recovered from it yet. So
wait, hang on. Where are you going with this? Sorry.
It ties into this whole discussion. Okay. But when we were driving up, when we got there, it was really foggy.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about this, thinking like pathway road, and the thing that I didn't realize how big these drop offs were until we were headed back a couple days later, and it was sunny outside. But the thing that I was doing is hugging the double yellow line, just I'm just gonna stay on that, and every turn it's good. I don't know, I can't see 30 yards in front of us, but if I hug that double yellow line. And I think in a lot of times there's these things, these guardrails, these double yellow lines that we can have that are tools on our pathway in our relationship with Christ that can be helpful. And one of those are the prayer that you talked about on Sunday.
Yeah.
So that's how it all ties in, Josh. Does that make sense?
That is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just made me think of that as we were talking about this prayer.
Yeah.
Just for the record, we got into the rental car and I said, hey, I've got to do some work. I get car sick really easily. But the thing that triggers my car sickness is slamming on the brakes and accelerating really fast. So can you please not do both of those things? Well, he decided to do that the entire driving experience. And so, and he drove the whole time because he's a 6 and he likes to be in control.
Yes.
And so that was what we were giving him a hard time about, just for the record.
Well, and when we were up in the mountains, it was really icy. So you just you accelerate fast and then you fishtail around.
No,
It's
that's
really,
fun.
it's fun.
Yes.
And so they were like, every time, but it was a blast. Yeah.
Yeah. I see it.
Norcross is, we made fun of him for being older than us the whole time. And so it just spiked his heart rate. The old man Norcross was hurting.
Well, I heard, yes. And he had some physical ailments as well because of his age.
Yep. Although that dude is surprisingly agile and fit. I was trying to keep up with him at times. I think I won because his knee was like the size of a balloon by the time we were done.
Yeah.
But he still did it anyways.
Well, he's a rower. He rows.
Yeah, he rows.
He's a ferocious rower.
Yeah. You've told me this before. We need to get back on subject. But that dude just goes.
Yes.
He does not stop
Yeah.
ever. And it's because we're trying to relax. You know, one of the best things about skiing is lunch in the middle of the day, you're relaxing next to the fire down in the lodge. And he's like,
How many times can I go down the slope?
Yeah. So the second day, I think we almost skied the elevation of Mount Everest.
You're over it. You
vert,
passed it.
No, I was just short of it.
Oh, okay.
The vert was 28,000 feet that we had done. I think I snowboarded 32 miles in a day.
Goodness.
It was because Norcross was just
Were your legs on fire?
oh yeah, legs, ankles,
Yeah.
calves, everything. But it was so worth it. It was so fun. Anyways,
Okay, back to prayer.
But the analogy, the road, double yellow line, there's a prayer. These are boundaries. These are guidelines that help keep us on the pathway. And I would just say for me personally, not the exact prayer that you shared on Sunday, but a version of that prayer has been that exact thing in my life and Ashley's life. And we've said it so many times, and it's the prayer, give me wisdom to know what is right and the courage to do it even when it's difficult. What was the version you shared on Sunday?
Yeah, just to reveal the pathway.
Reveal the path. Yeah.
I'm dependent upon you to reveal the pathway.
Yep.
God, you know what's best. And I'm inviting you into this. So I'm going to pause and do that.
Yep.
And then give me the wisdom to know all the different details and the
Yep.
courage to do it.
Yep. And I'd say whenever I pray that prayer in hopes of staying on the pathway that God designs for me and my family, most of the time I know what's right, but the prayer helps reveal the fact that I don't want to look at what's right. And so give me wisdom to know what is right is, dang it, I know it. Give me courage to follow through with it because I
That's
need
the
the
follow.
courage.
Yeah.
And then the last part I think is really important is just even when it's difficult, because it's going to be difficult, but it's fulfilling. It's worth it. Following Jesus is worth it. It really is truth and life, and it's the way of life. And so I would reiterate that prayer. Just give me wisdom to know what is right and the courage to do it even when it's difficult.
Yeah.
If someone hasn't ever prayed that before, or they find themselves in an area where they're tempted to make a decision that maybe they honestly know is not best, I think just adding this prayer to your daily prayer life, or we say it around the dinner table each night, that kind of thing, I think it's just so helpful. It's such a good guardrail to stay on the pathway towards what you ultimately hope for.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I alluded to earlier is that Christianity is testable. In other words, it's okay, Jesus, if he's the author of life, the pathway he lit up should give you hope. It should make life better and make you better at life. And so that's one of the beauties. It's okay, Jesus, I'm praying this, you're revealing it, I'm following you even when it's difficult. And you can sit here and attest today because it's testable. I'm telling you, it does enhance your marriage. It does allow you to have more peace. It does allow you to have more direction, meaning, and purpose. And so, I wouldn't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
And so that's, and along the way, and this is what I said on Sunday as well, is that the adjustments to our path. So it's okay, here's Jesus. We believe he is who he claimed to be. Here's what he did to light up our pathway. He said, this is the way of hope. And then we have a choice to follow, but sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes we get off. And that's where friends, people in our life can help us adjust those pathways. And that's why having friends who have that same kind of direction, in other words, I believe Jesus is who he claimed to be. I'm aware of Jesus' path. I'm here to encourage you. And I'm here to motivate you and help you adjust. These are passages where you hear, iron sharpens iron, two are better than one, wounds from a friend can be trusted. All of those are because we have this common belief that Jesus is the author of life, that Jesus is the light that lights up our pathway, and that our job is to follow him, to completely open our palms and trust him. But we can't do this alone. We need one another, and we need to invite God into it with what you just prayed.
Yeah. And and I think community, people, all that's so important to finding the pathway of Jesus. A lot of because I think Jesus calls us to imitate in so many different ways. He says, hey, follow me, do what I do, love as I have loved you. And I think in a lot of ways, that's the very thing that helps us stay on the pathway is doing that with Jesus and also with other people. And so as I think about mine and Ashley's pathway, it's been so influenced by you and Jill and other people in our life who we have just said, we like the way they're married. Let's imitate them. Let's do what they're doing and listen to what they have to say. And those have been guardrails, again, that have kept us. And even when we're like, we want to bust through the guardrails and go right off the mountain because that's just our flesh and everything in our story.
Yes, do it our way.
You guys have done something that said, hey, get back on, like stay on, keep your eyes focused, that kind of thing.
And vice versa. Like Jill and I constantly are going like, man, we're stuck. And then we meet with, we have lots of friends that are just saying, hey, we're following Christ. And then we meet with them and Jill and I have that's how moment. Those moments where you're like, oh, that's how that looks. Yeah. Oh, that's what that looks like. Oh, when Jesus said to mutually submit, no, you first. No, like I'm going to defer to you. That whole thing in in Ephesians. It's like, oh, that's what that looks like, and that's where God did not leave us alone. That there are people around us to encourage us, to spur us, to pray for us, to empathize with us, and to say, keep following, be faithful. Stay on the double yellow line.
So I'd say if anybody's listening, I think a big question for you is just as you think about your hopes, especially this Christmas season and what you hope for with your family or your finances or your job or your kids, whatever it might be, is the pathway you're currently on aligned with the person of Jesus and the pathway he lays out for you in that area? And if it's not, what do you need to do to get on the pathway that Jesus lays out for you? And is it people? Is it time with God? Is it this prayer? Whatever it might be, I would just encourage you to take a step in the direction of doing that.
Absolutely.
So, awesome, Buck. Well, we're going to be wrapping up the series this week, part 3, kind of wrapping up. There's always Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
So
that's like an addendum.
Yeah, exactly. It's an asterisk, right?
Yeah.
But we're going to be wrapping it up and talking through even more aspects of hope and how we ultimately experience hope and ultimately live lives full of hope.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be talking through that, and I'm excited for part 3. So for those of you who watching, listening, we will see you online or in person on Sunday.
Sounds great. Thanks, man.